name's Peter Carr, and today I'm discussing the question of whether war between humans and machines is inevitable. A lot of people have been discussing this question ever since the Terminator movies of the 1980s, when the American military computer started a war to take over the world in the movie. This is the wrong question, and dangerously so, which I'll explain further at the end. But as to the question itself, let's just quickly answer that question. Yes, war with machines is inevitable, and we'll explain that now. War, what is it good for? Look, we've all seen Hollywood movies, and well, it's always the good guys going to war against the bad guys, and the good guys always win. The reality is probably not quite as romantic as that, and it's probably a lot simpler. If you look through history, as far back as our historical records go, wars have generally been waged by people to get stuff. Land, gold, jewels, slaves. People are taking stuff from other people. Now, we call that economic advantage. Wars have been waged for economic advantage. And even the revolutions, which have been some of the most significant conflicts, are generally about redistribution of wealth. Taking the money from the rich, giving it to the poor. Taking economic advantage from one group, giving it to another group. So, what does war look like? Is it this? What about this?
I have a dream that one day...
Most of the significant conflicts since 1945, which have led to massive changes, economic redistribution, political power changing hands, have been non-violent conflicts. People have realised that often non-violent conflicts can be a more effective way to wage a war and get what you want. What about machines? There's been a war between machines and people going on even before historical records started. Let's start with the Agrarian Revolution. You've probably heard of this, you probably have a general understanding. This started in England in about the 17th century, spread to Europe and the rest of the world. It was a situation where a number of machines had been invented, and those machines enabled one or two people to do the agricultural work that had been done previously by thousands of small farmers. Now, this revolution had enormous benefits for humanity, and that's what we always focus on. Suddenly, food was abundant. These machines could produce far more than the individual farmers with a pick and a shovel. So food supplies were suddenly abundant, and the excess food was being exported around the world to other countries. Starvation was disappearing overall. And that's great. That's the way we view it in history. But there is another side, which is, well, what happened to those thousands of small farmers who were replaced by the machines? Well, that's where cities came from. Before that, cities were generally small. Even Rome, which was the most famous city in history, had a fairly small population compared to a modern city. These farmers all had to go somewhere to try and find somewhere to get work. They needed a way to feed their families, they went to these cities and had tried to find work. What happened to them, we don't know. Some of them would have ended up begging in the streets. Many would have starved to death. Some would have found work. But on balance, historians just look at that and say, well, these machines took those jobs, but the benefit for humanity overall made up for any downside. Okay, so that these introductions of machines continued. Let's fast forward to the Industrial Revolution. Maybe 100, 150 years later, again, started in England. Much more advanced machines now. The steam train, steam engines in factories, and a number of other machines that you'll read about in history books were introduced. How do we view that historically? We say, well, these trains enabled mass transportation, mass communications, moving goods around the globe at a rate that was never possible before. The steam machinery in factories enabled mass production of consumable items, clothing, household items, weapons, you name it. So once again, historically, on balance, we say wonderful, wonderful, huge step forward for humanity. And on balance, we probably all agree it was. And that Industrial Revolution spread around the world, and every country adopted the same techniques and started building factories and production lines and so on and so forth. Was there a downside? Well, yes, of course. The factories making clothes put millions of artisan clothes makers out of work all over the world, initially all over Europe and then the rest of the world. Millions of them. The steam trains put out of work the horse and cart drivers. And all of these machines had an economic impact. Millions and millions of people lost their jobs and would have had to find another way to survive, or not. Many, many millions of people probably starved to death, and their families probably lost their homes and ended up destitute. But on balance, we say it was all a good thing. Well, let's jump forward another 100 years or so. The computer revolution started after the Second World War, mostly in England, USA. What was the effect of that? What happened there? Well, suddenly machines were smart enough now to do much more complex tasks. IBM rolled out machines that could do the most complex mathematical calculations in seconds that would have taken people days, weeks to do. The internet, email, typists, rooms full of typists lost their jobs. Millions and millions of people in thousands of different occupations lost their jobs because computers could do them quicker, faster, and they didn't have to be paid. Once a company hired a computer, they could get rid of thousands of people and they didn't have to pay it a wage. So, once again, we look at this historically and we say, well, yes, millions of people lost their jobs. A lot of those people probably never did find useful work again, starved to death, ended up in the streets begging, had to be taken care of, found some menial work somewhere else, who knows. On balance, we say society progressed and became richer, and the next generation got to benefit from all of these new technologies. And you know, most of us agree with that. Most of us say, wow, isn't it great that we've got the internet and YouTube and all these technologies. Of course it is. I'm very much aware of that. I've been working for, more than 10 years in the technology arena, helping to promote the adoption of technology and technology strategies, aimed at improving things. So I'm very much aware of those changes and those benefits. On balance, we've been happy with that. So the interesting thing that's been happening recently is that it's been dawning upon people that maybe this balance is about to tip in the other direction. And I would say, in my opinion, certainly that's what's going to happen now. Over the course of the next 5, 10 and 15 years, machines are going to take most of the jobs that people do. And we will not be able to replace those jobs with other jobs. There'll be a few new jobs, but at the end of the day, there'll be 60, 70, 80% unemployment in most countries. Drivers, every kind of driver. We all know what's happening with driverless vehicles. Truck drivers, bus drivers, transportation drivers, city-to-city transport, taxi drivers. Lawyers and accountants are going to be replaced by machines, and there won't be replacement jobs for those people. So let's say 10, 15 years from now, 3/4 of people won't have a job. And that is the time when the machines will have won. So, as to the question, is a conflict between machines and humans inevitable? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. It's been going on for hundreds of years, and it's almost over. It will be over in about 10 or 15 years, and the machines will have won. Now, at this point, a lot of people would say to me, well, I can see what you're saying, but the machines are not being led by a leader, a machine leader who's waging this war on behalf of machines. And to that I'd say, well, wars never are. Regardless of what Hollywood says in the movies, wars are never led by one person waging a war. Wars are always the cumulative effect of thousands of different people taking different actions and making decisions. And those things all add up together, and then sometimes at the time, sometimes retrospectively, we say that was a war or a revolution or whatever kind of conflict. So for this war to happen, there doesn't need to be a single leader leading the machines. But more importantly, in fact most importantly, it just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. 15 years from now, when we're all sitting around and 3/4 of us don't have a job, and the machines have taken all of those jobs from us, we'll all acknowledge that they won that war. And nobody's going to care whether they had a leader or not. The reality is, they'll have won the war. So at the beginning I said it's the wrong question. It's the wrong question because the answer is so obvious that a child could see it. What is the right question? The right question is, what can we do about it, and can we make it a win-win scenario so that people and machines both benefit instead of just the machines? So that's what I'll talk about in my next talk. If you look below, you'll see the links where you can click on that one. Have a nice day.